So this lesson video, we will read an excerpt, Sweet Land of Liberty. And this is going to be historical nonfiction. So this would be historical fiction, it's a story, but our character here, Marian Anderson, was a real person. So we have in 1939, Oscar Chapman learned that a young African-American woman named Marian Anderson was not allowed to sing at the Constitutional Hall in Washington, D.C. because of the color of her skin. He and his friend Walter White worked together to give her the opportunity to have a concert at the Lincoln Memorial instead. All right, that would be our background because an excerpt does not pick up, it wouldn't start at the beginning of a story. It can, but this one didn't. So this would be the background information that we need before reading this story, because then it wouldn't make sense, because excerpts can stop. Excerpts would be not a tiny piece, but a few page piece of a longer story, because the test makers, you only have so much time on your test. All right. The Lincoln Memorial had never been used for a public gathering, but Oscar wasn't about to let that stop him. Oscar went to see his boss, Harold Ickes, who agreed to talk to his boss, President Franklin Roosevelt. Oscar stood anxiously as Ickes called President Roosevelt to ask his permission. "Tell Oscar to let Marian Anderson sing at the top of the Washington Monument if she wants to," President Roosevelt said. "It's a wonderful idea." Oscar had a big job ahead of him. He wanted to make sure people in the government showed their support for Marian. He knew some wouldn't want to come, like the school board members back in Oscar's hometown. They didn't believe in equal rights. Equal rights would mean that no matter if you were black or white, you could sing, it could also have to do with women too, that women should be able to do any job that a man can do, and black people should have the same opportunities as white people. That would be our equal rights idea. Oscar decided to put them on the spot. He sent invitations by telegram to every important government official, senator, and representative. Not only that, he asked the messenger to bring back a signed receipt for each one of them. No one would be able to claim he didn't get an invitation. A telegram would be like a phone call. It would be like an old-timey phone call, and it would have a receipt because an operator would be like running the telephone lines back then. One man wadded up the telegram and threw it down. The messenger told Oscar. He said, "That squirt, Oscar Chapman, is stirring up trouble." Oscar laughed. Stirring things up was exactly what he aimed to do. On Easter Sunday, April 9, 1939, people gathered early near the Lincoln Memorial. Thousands came in buses from Philadelphia, Marian Anderson's hometown. At first, the day was cold and cloudy, but soon the sky cleared. By 5 o'clock, when the concert was set to begin, the crowd stretched from Lincoln Memorial to Washington Monument. Constitution Hall, where Marian Anderson had hoped to sing, could seat 4,000 people, but now 75,000 people of all ages and races would hear her. When Marian stepped forward, she looked out on a vast sea of faces. She could feel a great wave of goodwill pouring out from everyone. She took a deep breath and sang from her heart. Marian chose to begin by singing not just about, but to the country she loved. Changing the words of a beloved old song, a hush came over the crowd as her powerful voice rang forth. "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, to thee we sing, land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring." As the concert ended, Walter White caught sight of a young girl in the crowd. He saw her stretch out her hands toward the great singer. Tears streamed down her face and hope gleamed in her eyes. Walter remembered that girl for the rest of his life. Thousands of people heard Marian Anderson sing that day. It was the greatest concert crowd the Capitol had ever seen, and the first major gathering at the feet of Abraham Lincoln for the cause of civil rights. But not the last. 24 years later, Martin Luther King Jr. made his most famous speech in the same place. And Oscar Chapman? Well, he said about opening parks and swimming pools in Washington, D.C. to everybody. whatever the color of his or her skin. Oscar Chapman was a man who liked to keep stirring things up. After all, sometimes that's the only way to get things done. You could say here that stirring things up is an example of figurative language, and we could say that is an idiom because technically he's not stirring anything up. What this would be saying is he was stirring up this event to happen at the time. Well, normally, and you could say that we could say planning this event to have Marion sing, and obviously everyone loved it. You wouldn't necessarily see that as a bad thing, but at the time, people viewed it as stirring things up or causing trouble. But in the case of Oscar, he's stirring things up for a good reason. So when you think of the idiom stirring things up, it might be referred to like if somebody was spreading like gossip and stuff, and then another character might say, "Why are you stirring things up?" Meaning causing trouble. So it could be good trouble or bad trouble in this case. So we could say figurative language, idiom. And an idiom is a commonly used phrase that means something different than the literal meaning. So the literal meaning of stirring things up would be like mixing something. But in this case, it would be an idiom, a commonly used phrase. And now we will have a look at our question here. Oh wait, also, this would be Marian Anderson. So she was a real person, and this is her, a real singer. So this would be, we wouldn't say this, this wouldn't be considered, well, we don't know if our test makers, if this is her autobiography, well, an autobiography would mean she wrote it, so it can't be an autobiography. But it could be like a historical fiction type biography story about her. All right, so we have, what do paragraphs 12 and 13 show about the audience who listened to Marian Anderson sing at the Lincoln Memorial? All right, so our question, what do paragraphs 12 and 13 show about the audience who listened to Marian Anderson sing at the Lincoln Memorial? We would want to go back up here and read paragraph 12 and 13. So 12 includes the song itself. But we have, Marian chose to begin by singing not just about, but to the country she loved, changing the words of a beloved song. A hush came over the crowd as her powerful voice rang forth. We could say here, so if they're all hushed, that would mean they're ready to listen to her. If they were all like booing and being loud, then that would have been bad, right? They would have maybe been like protesting her being there. But instead, they have a hush. So that could tell us that they're respectful and excited to hear her sing. So then we had 13. As the concert ended, Walter White caught sight of a young girl in the crowd. He saw her stretch out her hands to the great singers. Tears streamed down her face and hope gleaming in her eyes. So we could say here that it was a very moving performance. So if we go back to our question, all right, what do paragraphs 12 and 13 show about the audience who listened to Marian Anderson sing? We want to restate our question. So we always want to remember that whoever is reading our answer, they should be able to know what the question was without reading the question, or they should be able to know what the question was through your response. So I'll show you. We could say paragraphs 12 and 13 show that the audience who listened to Marian Anderson sing at the Lincoln Memorial. And then, as we can see, I took our question and reworded it. So now I can put what it showed about the audience. So we can say paragraphs 12 and 13 show that the audience who listened to Marian Anderson sing at the Lincoln Memorial, we could say you could have a lot of different interpretations here, right? So we could say they were respectful. We could also say they were excited, because if they were all quiet at the same time, that shows that they were excited, anticipation. And then when this would be the better paragraph, because this paragraph 14 tells us that it was the largest concert crowd the Capitol had ever seen. We can use that as our evidence, though, but we still have to say what it says about these paragraphs. All right, wait. So we can say we're excited to hear her performance, and we can say emotional after hearing her. And then I want to back it up with the evidence. So like the evidence I had said, I am liking the one where there's a hush over the crowd. So we could say in paragraph 12, a hush comes over the crowd, or we could explain what hush is. The crowd is very quiet. I'll just use a synonym for hush. The crowd is very quiet, which shows that they are excited to hear her sing. And then I could say, because if everyone was talking, that would show they weren't being respectful to Marian. I'm just giving a reasoning here. So here would be my evidence, and then I kind of follow it up with why I used it. So I'm saying this is showing that they were all being quiet, because if they were being loud, it would show they didn't really want to be there. And then another piece of evidence, we could say, after Marian sings, a girl in the audience is, well, first, if someone's crying, right, tears stream down her face. Sometimes people might think you're crying because you're sad, but in this case, we would want to specify that she was crying because she was hopeful and emotional. So we'll say, after Marian sings, a girl in the audience is crying because she is so, we'll say, emotional and happy over Marian's, we'll say, beautiful performance. If I wanted to add another piece of evidence, I could say, after Marian sings, comma, if I wanted to add another, we could say, another detail that shows the crowd was excited to hear Marian perform was the fact, no, I don't want to word it like that. We could say another detail that shows the crowd was excited to hear. I could say, lastly, I could just kind of finish it with this, because I don't have to technically say it's a detail. If you have a good detail, like these are they're examples from the text, so an event that happened, or even a quotation, you don't always have to label it as the details. So we could say here, lastly, and I'll say thousands of people. It was the largest crowd the Capitol had ever seen. So I could say, lastly, the crowd that came to see Marian was the largest that ever came to, or that ever, we already used came, so we'll say that ever gathered to see a performance at the Capitol. Actually, at the Capitol at all, because there's other things besides performances at the Capitol. You could have speeches and stuff, so you could say that ever gathered at the Capitol. So that would be our question for, let's see, the Liberty, Sweet Land of Liberty. And that would be the lesson.